Hey, Siri.
Hey, how may I help you?
Play the Relationship Status Podcast.
Playing the Relationship Status Podcast.
I would ask him, like, what are you doing? Where are you going with this? What are you trying? And he really didn't have, like, a real answer.
Okay.
So I didn't feel like we were going to be compatible later on down the line.
I think that goes back to something I've often heard and think myself, that men date women thinking they're never going to change, and women date men
Thinking that they are.
thinking that they can change them.
Relationship Status. New episode every Monday at 12 noon on Defy Life Network.
The following podcast is being brought to you by the Defy Life Podcast Network.
History is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is also a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells of people where they have been and what they have been, where they are and what they are. Most important, history tells a people where they still must go and what they still must be. The relationship of history to the people is the same as the relationship of a mother to her.
Hello and Hotel. This is Brother Khemet coming at you with another episode of Blaquegumbo on the Defy Life Podcast channel. This is Brother Khemet, and this is a new episode of Blaquegumbo. You guys can reach me at blaquegumbo@gmail.com. That's BLAQUE gumbo@gmail.com. Now, you know what we do. We're going to stir the pot up, and we in mix and stirring it up, and the name that we come out with is Dr. Carter G Woodson. Dr. Carter G Woodson. This brother here was born in the early 1800s, and what the brother did, man, was amazing. He was pretty much a juggernaut for black history. He is the force behind what we know today as Black History Month. But Black History Month wasn't always Black History Month, so we're going to dive in a little bit to his background to see how this thing came about. When young Carter G, he was born from both his mother and father was born into slavery, so he was the seventh out of 9 siblings that came along. And they originated in Canton, Virginia. And at some point, they ended up moving to West Virginia, and he was able to attend a high school called Frederick Douglass High. And the brother went on from Frederick Douglass High. He went on to Berea College to get his bachelor's, and he went on to the University of Chicago to get his master's. And after that, the brother went to Harvard and got his doctorate in science. Now, he was the second black man to ever receive a doctorate from Harvard. W.E.B. Du Bois was the first to have a doctorate from Harvard. And we talking about in the early 1900s. Think about it. We talking the early 1900s. By 1912, he was graduating out of Harvard. Now think about that. But the brother had a burning desire. His burning desire was this. He knew that black people had a history far richer and far deeper than slavery. A lot of people want us to think that, the way the system is set up is to think that our history started with slavery. And he wanted to disprove that and show that slavery was actually an interruption to our history. So he set out on a personal mission. Like I said, he was a juggernaut for us when it came to this. He set out on a personal mission to make sure that black people understood who they were, what they were for. He wanted them to understand that they had a history far greater than anything that they were told about. Because you got to remember, the way things were set up in this country, especially back then, the way that we was represented, we was always represented in a negative light. We was always represented as subservient. We was always represented as we didn't contribute anything to the world. And we all know, contrary to that, the world was basically based and built around the things that we contribute. As we understand today, almost every facet of life, or everything that you can think of, our hands are in it. Either we invented it, we've played a part in it. When you go back and look at the history books, we are understanding today. But this brother had the foresight back then. Also, this brother was in a couple fraternities. He was in the first Black Greek fraternity, which was called Sigma Pi Phi. And some of you might not be familiar with that. It was created by a guy named Henry Minton back in 1904. And Henry Minton, one of the things he said he wanted to emulate the fraternity at Yale that was called Skull and Bones. So he created one called Sigma Pi Phi, and it's a postgraduate fraternity. So you can't just join it. You have to be recruited. But anyway, Dr. Carter G Woodson was a member of that fraternity, better known as the Boule. That's another subject for another time. I just want to give you a brief input, because a lot of our great people here. Also, Martin Luther King was a member of Boule also. But he was also a member of another Greek fraternity called Omega Psi Phi. And one of the great things, and I got to give a big shout out to Omega Psi Phi, back during this time when he was a member, he pitched the idea to the brothers at a fraternity meeting that we need to have something to teach our people about their history. So what happened was these brothers came up with an idea, and I think this was right around 1921, 22. They came up with an idea, and they called it Negro History and Literature Week. And this went on for several years, and what they did, they actually put a pamphlet together, almost like a curriculum, that teachers could buy for $2, and it was a 5-day lesson plan that taught the history of blacks, before we was enslaved, and taught some of the things that took place during slavery and some of the inventions we had. And so it was a book put together with pictures. It had biographies of different people, and this is what they could use for their lesson plan. So we want to give a shout out to Omega Psi Phi for having the foresight and the courage to do this. And also, and about around 1926, Dr. Carter G Woodson ended up becoming over what they call Negro History and Literature Week. And he kind of redefined it, and he kind of cut it down to what we call Negro History Week. And originally, Negro History and Literature Week started in April. And when Carter pretty much became over it, he took it to the month of February. And the reason this is interesting, because a lot of times we've been told that, we was giving February because it's the shortest month of the year. But let me give you the real deal. The reason February was picked was because of Dr. Carter G Woodson himself. He admired several people. He admired Abraham Lincoln because he believed Abraham Lincoln, was part of the abolition movement. And he admired Frederick Douglass. And both of these guys had birthday in the month of February. And so that's why February was significant. And also there's another big significance for him for February, because that was February the 3rd, 1870 was the month in time that the 15th Amendment was passed, which gave black men, not all black people, but gave black men the right to vote. Now, February 3rd is a very important day for a great friend of mine. Happy birthday. But like I said, that was significant. That's why February was picked. He picked it. Nobody did it. He decided to do that because of the significance that it held for him. So we want to throw that myth out the door because it came from this brother. And let's think about it. February the 3rd, 1870, the 15th Amendment was passed. Black men were given the right to vote. Now, I know you guys, some of you who are not familiar with this, so I thought black people got the right to vote in 1965. Well, that was when all black people got the right to vote. But in 1870, black men had the right to vote. But guess what? Because of the racist society that we was living in back then, and we still living in a good little bit of it, we wasn't allowed. We were murdered. We were lynched. I mean, we were slaughtered if we tried to vote. They had every trick in the world. They just refused to let us do it. You know, they just refused to let us do it. So that was a significant month for Mr. Carter G. Woodson. Now, this was February the 7th, 1926 is when he changed the date. So now, here's what took place. So we had Negro History Week from 1926 all the way up to the 70s. And there's a group of young students at Kent State University. They was called the United Student Front. And they started pushing for the idea that Negro History Week should be Black History Month. So by 1970, they were celebrating Black History Month at Kent State. And by 1976, we got legislation under Gerald Ford to make February National Black History Month. But check this out. Black History Month is just not celebrated in the United States. In 1987, London started celebrating Black History Month. In 1995, all of Canada started celebrating Black History Month. In October, in the UK, they celebrate Black History Month. And in certain parts of Germany, from what I've heard, they celebrate Black History Month. So Black History Month is just not tied to the United States like some of us may think. Black History Month, is bigger than that. And just to give you a dabble of the brother and the history of this brother has written over 30 books. We're talking about Dr. Carter G. Woodson. He's written over 30 books. And I'm going to give you just a few of his books and give you a time frame. In 1915, he wrote Education of the Negro. In 1918, he wrote A Century of Negro Migration. In 1921, he wrote the Negro in Our History. And in 1933, he wrote The Miseducation of the Negro. Some of you may have heard that. If you hadn't heard that, please go out and get the book, The Miseducation of the Negro. And basically, he was just breaking down to us that in the education system, especially the European education system, and that we have been totally miseducated on who we were, what we were, and we didn't really understand how great of a people that we were. He also founded in 1920 the Associated Republic, which is the oldest African-American published country in the USA that still exists. I mean, this brother was deep. I'm talking about deep. He also wrote many essays in black newspapers, like the New York Age, like the Pittsburgh Courier, the Pennsylvania, the African American, the Chicago Defender. I mean, this brother's doing enough. He also was a columnist in Marcus Garvey in Negro World. He did a lot of columns in Marcus Garvey for Marcus Garvey. So his whole concept, his whole idea was to lift us up through scholarly research. This wasn't just off the top of his head. This brother wanted to make sure we got the right information, and he did it through scholarly research, And he was also the founder of Association for the Study of Negro Life and History here in the United States. I mean, this brother, he basically married his work. He didn't have any kids. He never got married. He didn't have any kids. And a lot of lady folks were trying to get at him. And he dedicated his life to research. They say even up until the time that he died, he would still work, 12, 15 hours a day. And the brother died in 1950 at the age of 74. And upon his death, he was working on a 6-volume encyclopedia called Encyclopedia Africana that he was working on, which detailed the history of African people before enslavement. So we got to understand, slavery was a part of our history. Slavery is not our history. So we don't never want to think that, just because these Europeans tell us that, because this brother was very well traveled. This brother traveled in Africa. He traveled in Asia. He traveled in different parts of Europe. And he also was an administrator at a school in the Philippines. That's when he was working with the Department of War at the time. And the brother went on to become, he was dean over at the Howard University of the liberal arts program. He was dean there. He took his message there. And one of the things that I found heartbreaking was, even when he was trying to get this information into the curriculum of the HBCUs, he got hell because a lot of our people at certain times, everybody didn't think the same. I'm going to put it that way. And they thought that, that he should, not incorporate that because they wanted to move forward. They didn't want to get into the past. And a lot of people still feel that way. A lot of black people feel that way today. They don't like to deal with the past. They only want to go forward. But what he was trying to explain to him, in order to have a successful and bright future, you have to know your past. You have to know your past accomplishments. You have to be able to inspire people to move forward. They have to have something to understand who they came from, where they came from, what kind of people they came from. And if all they know was that we was enslaved, then think about what kind of history that was. If all you knew about black people were, we were slaves. No, we wasn't slaves. We were people that was enslaved. Let's get that understanding. We was enslaved. And upon being enslaved, that's how we became slaves here in America, because we were not slaves, we were free people, then we were put into bondage and we turned into slaves. So right now, black people in the United States are basically hybrided people. And some people might not agree, but we are, because we don't know our original name, we don't know our language, we don't know our folkways, we don't know our diet, we don't know our customs. So we have been brought to a land that has cut everything off from us and been replaced by something else, from somewhere else and somebody else. So we're following something that's just don't belong to us. A lot of us are waking up today and we're beginning to understand, and we'll be able to incorporate some of our practice. We've been able to see, things we need to do. But we are hybrided here in America. But I just want to say, man, Carter G Woodson, Dr. Carter G Woodson, let me get that straight, because I never want to disrespect the brother. Because what he did for us was monumental, and the body of work that he did, that he sacrificed himself, no wife, no kids, research. I mean, that's what he did. Put it out, day in and day out. And the brother lived to be 74 years old. Also, he was also part of the inspiration for the celebration. With Negro History Week was also the part of the celebration for Juneteenth, which is celebrated June the 19th of every year, which was the abolishment of slavery. That part of that celebration came out of Negro History Week, because we wanted to show, we wanted to celebrate certain things. So we got to give him credit for that. And like I said, I want to give a shout out to Omega Psi Phi for having the foresight to be able to work with the brother with the idea that he had, and the fact that they decided to do something about it. They just didn't say, oh man, that's a good idea. No, these brothers did something about it. So we got to give them their props and their contribution to what they did. And we want to give out the brothers into Sigma Pi Phi, which is the Boule. We're going to talk about them one day. Because we're going to get into a little bit about the history, but we're going to give them a shout out because Dr. Carter G Woodson was a member. We also understand Martin Luther King was a member. So we want to give a shout out to them. But this is what I want to say to Dr. Carter G Woodson, to the brother. We know you in the ancestor realm right now. We just want to say that we love you. We appreciate you for everything that you did. You gave your life. You gave your soul to scholar research to give us the right information so that we can move forward. So we really appreciate and we love you to death. Also, we never want to forget, because of the great body of work that Dr. Carter G Woodson, put out for us, that his name is on buildings and institutions throughout the United States. A few other states will have several of his buildings that are named after him, schools, different learning institutions. California, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Minnesota, New York, North Carolina, Texas, Virginia, West Virginia, and the great Washington, D.C. And like I said, the brother did wonderful things for us. We cannot thank him enough. And we just have to say thank you, Dr. Carter G. Woodson. You are a true African hero. You are a true African American hero for our people. Thank you.
How do you defy life? By standing out from the crowd, living life on your own terms, being unapologetically you. Say it all with Defy Life gear. Stylish apparel and accessories for men, women, and kids. T-shirts, hoodies, hats, bags, outerwear, and more. Visit DefyLifeGear.com for all of your Defy Life gear. And remember, your lifestyle should always be defiant. DefyLifeGear.com.